Hello and welcome to Nursing News You Can Use. I'm Tina Baxter and I am your host. This is our show for February the 22nd, 2023, and I'm looking forward to being with you here today. Welcome to those of you that are on our Nurse Shark Academy page and the rest of you that are on our Baxter Professional Services page or those watching us live on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in. On this show, we like to talk about everything that's nursing, business, and news. And we're going to start off with our affirmations for today. Number one, sometimes you have to forget what's gone, appreciate what still remains, and look forward to what's coming next. Let me say that one more time. Sometimes you have to forget what's gone, appreciate what still remains, and look forward to what's coming next. Our second affirmation. Beautiful things happen when you distance yourself from negativity. Beautiful things happen when you distance yourself from negativity. And then our last one, I like this one. It says, a great pleasure in life is doing what people say you cannot do. A great pleasure in life is doing what people say you cannot do. That's a quote attributed to Walter Bagot. And this is coming from the inspirational daily calendar that we have for this year. So I'm very excited to share those with you. I do not have a leadership moment for you today because there's a heavy news day. And I thought, let's go ahead and just get into the news. So let's go on to our news and our first segment. Remember, we talked earlier about the nurse that removed the patient's foot without permission, allegedly because she wanted to practice her taxidermy. Well, there is a little bit of an update on that, so I wanted to let you know this story came out on this. It says nurse accused of removing patient's foot without permission pleads not guilty. Uh, so coming out of Wisconsin, she says a woman who was a nurse and accused of cutting off a dying man's foot without permission pleaded not guilty to 3 felony charges Thursday in Pierce County Circuit Court. So that was on February the 16th. This was published. 38-year-old Mary Kay Brown of Durand is charged with physical abuse of an elder person intentionally causing great bodily harm and mayhem, with both charges carrying enhancers due to the victim being an elder person. Brown also received a new charge of intentionally abusing patients, causing great bodily harm, with an enhancer of the victim being an elderly person. She pleaded not guilty to all of the charges during her arraignment on Thursday. She has been released on a $150,000 signature bond on December the 6th, 2022, with conditions that she have no contact with her former employer, Spring Valley Senior Living Facility, or the victim's family. Brown, who was a nurse at the time of the incident, is also not allowed to work in any capacity as a caregiver, whether employed or as a volunteer, according to online court records. Brown requested in a letter to Judge Roll on December 6th to bar media from court proceedings. So, according to this complaint, the count is laid out for physical abuse of an elderly person intentionally causing great bodily harm, increased penalty for elder person. And so that is going forward. What's interesting enough is that, again, the issue at hand here is, according to the criminal complaint, Brown was a person who cut the man's foot off. Nurses interviewed as part of the investigation said that Brown removed the foot for compassion and comfort, as the foot was necrotic, had begun to smell, and was barely still attached to the man's body. Some of the witnesses said that the man did not appear to be in any pain during the amputation, and there was no blood loss as a result of the procedure. Other witnesses have said the man moaned as it was being performed, while another said it was not a very good amputation. Once the foot was removed, Brown instructed staff to place it in a freezer to preserve it. Multiple witnesses said that Brown intended to taxidermy and bronze the foot as, quote, a reminder to wear your boots, which one nurse described as, quote, weird. One nurse said that they needed to report the incident to the facility's administrators and to the police. Staff of the nursing home said that Brown did not seek or obtain a doctor's order for the amputation and that it was outside of the scope of her job responsibilities to remove the foot, according to court documents. Brown also did not have permission from the man to perform the amputation, according to the criminal complaint. The director of the facility said that Brown did not document the incident and that the procedure should have been done by a doctor. So, again, this is an interesting story, kind of a bizarre story. We'll be keeping watch over what happened. So that's kind of the crux of what this was, and that's what was reported by the Minnesota News Gray Media Corp. So I just wanted to share where I got that source. Let's move on to our next story. This is coming out of the New York Times. And this is a story that we've been covering, something as nurses we all know, but I want to kind of reiterate what's happening. So this came out of the New York Times, and it says, nurses are burned out. Can hospitals change in time to keep them? And that's the reason why I'm bringing this story. We've talked about the burnout. We've talked about the shortages. We've talked about these things. But it's the idea of making the changes that intrigued me about this story. So just a little bit of a background. They talked about Francesca Camacho, who was a nurse who drove away from her 12-hour night shift as a critical care nurse at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago and tried to merge onto the highway traffic. The day's work, in her words, were just very terrible. This wasn't uncommon at the time. The Cook County area, this is back in the fall of 2020, was experiencing the highest level of COVID hospitalizations it had ever experienced, surpassed only by the Omicron variant wave the following year. She was on the phone with her parents, a ritual she developed as a way to decompress after a shift, when she noticed what appeared to be a teenage driver in front of her. She stated as saying, "I remember thinking, what is this girl doing that justifies her not letting me in? And I just felt this surge of rage." She hung up the phone and screamed and cried for the rest of the drive home. The next day, she asked her coworkers if anything similar had ever happened to them. They all said yes. Lunchtime therapy sessions with fellow nurses turned into professional therapy sessions. She says, "It really was a feeling of anger that I felt, and I think very deep underneath that it was just terrible sadness about what I was seeing and what we were all going through." So last August, it says she quit her job. She is now a first-year law student at Boston University and plans to use her law degree to advocate changes in the medical field. So we already know what contributes to burnout, right? Long working hours, physically and emotionally exhausting. Sometimes patients are upset. We take the brunt of things. But what's happened because of COVID, it's exacerbated this and it made it even worse. And so things like understaffing, which was rampant before COVID, now is really bad. A rise in violence and hostility toward healthcare workers over masking mandates and increase in deaths, particularly in the early months of the pandemic. And I have to say, it takes a toll, having to attend funeral after funeral after funeral, or not being able to attend the funeral because of COVID restrictions. I remember when COVID first happened, we had a few deaths in our community, and we had to limit how many people could come to the funeral. And normally it would be packed. Everybody would come because this was a well-known, well-liked person. And so it's really sad that you don't get that sense to mourn, but yet again, this other thing happens. So imagine all of this as it's coming down. So the American Nurses Foundation said last month that 57% of the 12,581 nurses surveyed said that they felt exhausted over the past 2 weeks, and that 43% that they felt burnt out. Just 20% said they felt valued. And it's pretty much been consistent. So they talked to another nurse, Kylie Schmidt, who spent 25 years working in the newborn ICU at a hospital near her home in San and Anselmo, Anselmo, California. She was drawn to the job. She credits that to her mother's work as a midwife and her own, quote, innate sense to want to protect them and heal them, and found herself doing whatever it took, riding in the back of ambulances, flying in a transport plane, or in helicopters through the Bay Area fog. She says she loved her jobs, her patients, her coworkers, but over the years, other challenges materialized. The transition from physical charts to electronic medical records took her away from the patient's side. And just as the pandemic hit, a transition to a management role tasked her and her coworker with overseeing more than 90 employees. And so she says she emotionally started feeling like a robot. And these are things that can happen. And then she found herself last May on the bottom mattress of her daughter's bunk bed, sick with COVID and quarantined from the rest of her family. And so she was reassessing her 2 hour commute, the emotional labor of the job, the compartmentalization. She saw a job listing for a nearby school nurse position, dusted off and updated her 23-year-old resume, and applied. The district interviewed her over a video call and offer her a job by the end of the next week. And this is what we're seeing. Nurses maybe not leaving the field entirely, but finding a different way of doing what they do because they just get so burnt out. And so read this article because it's very interesting what they are talking about. Some of the things, the mental health issues that some of these nurses are facing and dealing with the pandemic and the aftermath of the pandemic. But what I wanted to say is that I wanted to see what they said at the end. So at the end of the article, it says that one thing that's not an issue, said Dr. Menzik Kennedy of the American Nurses Association, is this interest in the field. Conventional wisdom would presume that with these intense levels of stress and burnout, interest in nursing would wane. However, we know that there were 60,000 qualified applications turned away from nursing schools this past year. So we're seeing less and less nurses coming in because of the lack of faculty, because of the lack of opportunities to get into clinical. That is a horrible thing that's happening. But my question is, what are we going to do as a healthcare system? But, I don't know because they don't really offer any solutions, right? Some nurses went into other fields, and look, I'm looking at the story, and it says, interesting quote. It says, in nursing, sometimes it's frowned upon when people say, "Oh, I feel so burnt out." It's almost like a shameful way to approach it. And I got to thinking about that. How many times do we as nurses take a mental health day? I need a mental health day. I need a day off. I'm not physically, I can go in, but mentally I'm not present, and it would be dangerous for me to work. How many of us can honestly say that we could do that and wouldn't get pushback from the hospitals if we do? And then how many of us would feel guilty because we'd be worried that we left our coworkers short staffed because we needed to take a mental health day. So what are we going to do about this? Those are the questions. So if you have comments, let me know. What can we do? All right, so let's move on because, again, we have a lot to cover today. Let's go back to the story that we've been covering about the fraudulent nursing diplomas. Here's an update to that story. This is from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and it says state officials call for nurses to surrender licenses in diploma scam. So a federal investigation into 3 Florida-based nursing schools that allegedly sold fake nursing degrees has begun to have local repercussions, according to state officials, as almost 24 Georgia nurses to surrender their licenses. And again, I just saw a report that it might have been a lot more widespread than they initially thought, because now they're saying that the amount of fake diplomas might be over 8,000 is what the latest report that I heard. But anyway, back to the story. It says, according to federal officials, the plot involved three South Florida nursing schools. We've talked about them: Siena College, Palm Beach School of Nursing, and Sacred Heart International Institute, that sold more than 7,600 counterfeit diplomas and transcripts for $10,000 and $15,000, and in some estimates, I heard up to $17,000. So in Georgia, there were 22 practicing nurses who allegedly obtained their licenses with fake diplomas or transcripts. On January 17th, the Georgia Board of Nursing formally requested the nurses to surrender their nursing license within 30 days. So they said that state investigators are working with the FBI to revoke the nursing licenses of nurses who won't give back their licenses on their own. The number of nurses who turned in their licenses by the deadline was not available by that time the article ran. So, unfortunately, several of the nurses say that their degrees and licenses are legitimate. So, at one time, maybe the schools were legitimate and they did do the work. And so it would be unfair of them to do that. So it says, according to this attorney who's representing them, Hannah Williams, she says, my clients are compassionate, hardworking immigrants who came to this country in pursuit of a better life. They legitimately obtained their education from accredited nursing schools and subsequently passed their licensing exams. So, and this is what makes me wonder: are they targeting them because they're immigrants? Because they've gotten this, they maybe went to that school. It doesn't say where they got their schooling from, so that makes me wonder. So they announced charges against 25 individuals back in January with the Florida schools, in which they said there was a wire fraud scheme that created an illegal licensing and employment shortcut for aspiring nurses. If convicted, each individual could face up to 20 years in prison. So it says a Channel 2 Action News report found that 3 of the nurses accused of having fake degrees worked at Atlanta VA Medical Center. Information was not available on the employment of the other 19 nurses. The VA has since said there's alerted about a small percentage of their employees who receive credentials from institutions awarding fraudulent nursing degrees to students. Okay, so this is really sad. According to Williams, she says they wish to be differentiated from individuals who fraudulently attain their degrees, and they are hopeful that there will be a fair investigation that allows them to tell their side of the story consistent with due process under Georgia law. So we'll see what happens with this. I mean, unfortunately, there might be some nurses that get caught up in this because they went to a school that, was incredible, unfortunately. Okay. Let's take a look at this other case, because we've been following the strike over across the pond in the UK. And this is from BBC News. And just want to give you a quick update. It says government recommends 3.5% pay rise for nurses and other workers. So according to this, judges, police officers, teachers, nurses, doctors, and dentists in England will be offered a 3.5% pay increase under proposals. The recommendations will now be considered by independent pay review bodies. Public sector workers are holding strike actions after rejecting last year's pay deal. Various government departments published their evidence to pay review bodies for 2023 to 2024 financial year starting in April. The Treasury says anything above 5% would risk fueling inflation, but it says 3.5% is affordable. The independent pay review bodies are likely to recommend more, and the government has repeatedly put great store on accepting their recommendations. Inflation is also expected to fall. The GMB union called the pay offer, quote, a disgrace, which will not prevent ongoing ambulance strikes. So now we've got ambulance strikes on here and a lot of other things that are happening. Rachel Harrison, the GMB's national secretary, says the proposal shows the government's true colors. Ambulance workers and others across the NHS, including cleaners, porters, and care workers, who are the backbone of the health service, deserve better. Ministers have no intentions of recognizing the value of the entire workforce. So, just to quickly kind of go over what it would mean. So nurses in England would get a 3.5% increase in 2023 to 2024, along with doctors and dentists, police officers in England and Wales. Teachers' starting salary in England will be increased to £30,000. Really? Increased to £30,000? Experienced teachers, that's starting salary, experienced teachers will see a 3% pay rise in 2023. Judges in England and Wales would be offered a 3.5%. Prison officers in England and Wales will see a £2,000 pay increase for those in the lowest band, ranging to £500 for those in the highest band. So, the Royal College of Nursing has called off next week's 48-hour strike in England to restart talks with the government following the new pay recommendations. So, we'll see what happens. According to this report in the UK, latest figures show inflation was 10.1% in January, down from 10.5% in December 2022. So we'll see what happens with this. But as always, we're interested in how the trends are going, not just in the United States, but also in other countries, because as we've seen, this is a worldwide phenomenon. Nurses are speaking out. Okay. So let's go to this story. This is a story we kind of talked about last time, I believe, about this doctor. This is a New York Times story, and it says a deadly epidural delivered by a doctor with a history of mistakes. Dr. Dmitry Shelkov, an anesthesiologist at a public hospital in a predominantly black neighborhood in Brooklyn, would later say that his job was straightforward with not a lot required. I'm going to say the reason why I'm bringing this up is not to bash this individual doctor, but to look at the whole system, because this doctor made repeated mistakes, he had a history of mistakes. And so where did he end up practicing? In a predominantly black neighborhood and an impoverished place where maybe people didn't have the best access to healthcare in the first place, and maybe not going to ask a lot of questions. So here we go. It says, when it came time to give an epidural to Shayasia Simple, a pregnant 26-year-old woman in labor at Woodhill Medical Center on July 3rd, 2020, Dr. Shelkov botched the routine procedure. The catheter to deliver the anesthesia should have gone about 4 inches into her lower back. Instead, he kept inserting the line, threading it up into more than 13 inches. Okay, so let's say this. I want to show you this. So on this, if you can see it, on this is 4 inches. I want to give you a visual. This is 4 inches. They said he inserted it about 14 inches, which is 3 times what it should have been, over 3 times what it should have been. This is why I think sometimes we read these 3 stories, we don't understand the implication of what we're seeing, but this is why I brought the ruler out, so you can understand what we're talking about here. So once he did this, according to the report, Dr. Shelkov administered a full dose of anesthesia without waiting to see how Ms. Simple responded to a small test dose. The anesthesia landed in her cerebral spinal fluid and circulated around her central nervous system. I can't breathe, Ms. Simple said as her breathing grew labored before stopping altogether. Another doctor rushed in to help. According to this, it says, I can't believe this is happening again. The doctor screamed at Dr. Shelkov. Her baby survived, but Ms. Simple did not. It was several weeks after George Floyd's murder had set off a national reckoning on race, and Ms. Simple's death sparked a demonstration outside the hospital and news coverage about how in New York City, Black women like Ms. Simple are 9 times more likely to die of pregnancy related complications than white women, a much greater disparity that exists nationally. And we have certainly seen that here in the state of Indiana. And this is why I'm bringing this out, because a lot of times people don't understand the implications of what happens when these systemic issues are happening. And so that's why I'm bringing this out. And it says, until now, the specific medical errors that caused Ms. Simple's death have not been publicly reported in detail, nor has it been reported that in more than 2 years before her death, 6 other pregnant patients in labor at Woodhill suffered adverse outcomes related to the administration of anesthesia. In almost all those cases, Dr. Shelkoff was apparently involved, according to the report, which did not name him but described errors attributed to him in other documents. So in some instances, he pushed the epidural needle or the catheter that it fits through in too far, which resulted in the anesthesia mixing with the cerebrospinal fluid rather than remaining in a separate space near the nerve roots, according to where it should be. So such mistakes, though rare, are usually caught quickly and corrected. But Dr. Shelkoff sometimes skipped a crucial safety measure, giving a small test dose and waiting to see the patient's reaction before administering the full dose of anesthesia. Here's where I take the biggest issue, and my heart goes out to that family and to all the women affected. Here's my biggest issue. It says, despite the clear pattern, administrators and department heads at Woodhull did little to monitor him. The document paints a disturbing picture of dysfunction at Woodhull, part of the city's public hospital system, which serves many of New York's most vulnerable mothers. Nearly 1,500 women give birth there each year, about 85% of them Black or Hispanic. Under 10% are white. The majority of patients have Medicaid. And that in itself is where I see the problem. And so we need to have a national conversation about this. And for those that don't think that systemic racism is available, it is. And it's not just racism, it's the whole economics of this. Because it doesn't matter if you have commercial insurance, Medicaid, or no insurance, you should be getting the best care in this country. You should have access to care. And that's what I want to point out in this story. And so the question becomes, what happens at Woodhull? So it says Woodhull Medical Center is one of 11 public hospitals run by New York City. The crown jewel of the city's medical system is Bellevue Hospital. I happen to have gone to Bellevue, with Woodhull at the other end of the spectrum. And so that's the issue. It says safety data from 2014 to 2017 made public by USA Today shows that women delivering at Woodhull had serious emergencies such as severe bleeding, strokes, and anesthesia complications at 2.5 times the rate of hospitals statewide, though that was lower than some other Brooklyn hospitals. The women who deliver at Woodhull have higher rates of conditions like hypertension and obesity that raise the complications, the doctors also noted. So then you're looking at also the environment that they're in, but and environmental factors, social economic factors, and all of those things that we look at. But this begs to differ. Why would they not do something about this doctor before then? And it's because this stuff is now starting to come out. Okay, let's move on. Let me know your comments. So let's go to our neighbors up north. Let's talk about this story because this is another food for thought moment, right? As we look at what's happening in healthcare, this is something I didn't know But it's interesting to see how other health systems navigate the shortages that we have. And so this is coming from CBC, and it says for $30 a month, Ontario doctors offer rapid access to nurse practitioners. So Medicare advocates say that it's creating a two-tier healthcare system, even though the practice is legal. Okay, so some doctors in Ontario are offering their patients the option of extra health care at a price. 7 day a week rapid access to appointments with a nurse practitioner for a fee of around $30 a month. Now, for those of us in the US, if we just had to pay $30 a month to see the nurse practitioner or the doctor extra, we would be like, sign me up, right? Everything else covered, just sign me up. But you have to understand this is a different system in Canada. And they said it's legal under both the federal and the provincial Medicare rules, but since it involves charging for health care, there's a debate over a two-tier health care in Canada. It says KinderCare Pediatrics in Toronto launched its nurse practitioner program in response to overwhelming demand from parents due to the surge in respiratory illnesses among kids last fall. Dr. Dan Flanders, who owns the practice, said we couldn't keep up. Everybody was working their brains out, and we were still turning away close to 100 patients a day. The program he developed is called KinderCare 365, and it's pitched on as an on-demand healthcare for kids. It relies on nurse practitioners who are authorized in Ontario to provide many of the same services as family physicians, including diagnosing illnesses and prescribing medications. The optional subscription costs $29 per month for one child, or $59 per month for 2 to 5 children. So again, this is in addition to their benefits that they already have paid for through their taxes. So this is an added benefit. So if you can afford it, you can do this, right? It promises an immediate virtual appointment with a nurse practitioner from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. any day of the week, and if necessary, an in-person appointment no later than the next day. So he says this has opened up a door so that many young families can have access to health care. It's not ideal that patients have to pay, but it's something that's going to help increase access. So here's the thing. In Canada, people are not used to paying for their health care. In the United States, we're used to paying at the wazoo for our health care. So for us, this would be a bargain. But for them, this would be horrific. And so you have to understand a different mindset. So the Canadian Health Act prohibits charging patients for medically necessary services that are covered under provincial health plans. Since nurse practitioner services are not covered by the Ontario Health Insurance Plan, it's legal for doctors to charge. And I guess my question is, how come their services aren't covered? That was my first question. They're like, why aren't you covering nurse practitioner services? So that's a whole other different ball of wax. But again, this is a different healthcare system. But within Ontario's complex system of compensating physicians, there's a disparity that means some patients can actually get health care from a nurse practitioner without paying anything. Physicians who practice in provinces' family health team model receive annual funding that allows them to hire health professionals such as nurse practitioners, so they don't charge their patients for access. So they can hire the nurse practitioner based on this particular model. If they don't choose and they do a fee for service model, such as Flanders does at KinderCare, they don't get the provincial funding for nurse practitioners, so therefore they can charge for those services. So that's the issue. And it's kind of interesting to find out what's going to happen. And so, according to Danielle Martin, who's the chair of the University of Toronto's Department of Family and Community Medicine, says that this disparity is inequitable and unfair, particularly since less affluent patients tend to be less likely to enroll in family health teams. So I'm not sure why the family health teams concept is not available to less affluent patients. That would be the question I would have. Why aren't they? Why can't they get access to that? And then the other thing would be, she says she acknowledges that it's legal for KinderCare to charge for these services, but she says it's forming a form of two-tier healthcare. Well, I'm asking my question this. Why couldn't people that can't or low income not opt in for the higher so they can get access to nurse practitioners? So this is very complex. And not being a Canadian, I don't know. So if there's any Canadians that watch this, kind of help me out here and explain what's going on. Because then another Toronto resident who won't name what her doctor is says that she felt that she pressured to opt for the $30 a month charge because her doctor was actually going to a practice that does that. And she says, a quote, "I'm outraged by it. The more that I thought about it, I felt like he was saying you don't really have a choice. If you want to have a family doctor, you have to pay this fee to stay on as a patient with me." And I guess if that's the practice he's going to, you have the option of changing to another doctor. Again, this is coming from a very United States perspective where our health system is completely different. And basically, you either find health care on your own or you don't. If you don't get it from your employer and you don't qualify for Medicaid, you better find something or you're just, got to do what you can do. And so it's interesting to find this. So I want to see what happens. Um, this is what I find interesting. She says, given the shortage of family physicians in Ontario, Martin said the provincial government should be looking to bolster primary care by funding nurse practitioners and interprofessional teams. Again, that's why I'm trying to figure out why they aren't funded. So that would be a question. But yeah, so I just found this quite interesting that they're having this conversation about the use of nurse practitioners in Canada and what's going to happen with that. So just curious if anybody Canadians watching, give me some insight. Okay, I want to share this story. And the reason why I'm sharing this story is because it's about perseverance. This is coming from ABC 10 News San Diego. It says an Alpine nursing student severely injured after pushing disabled car off I-8. It says the life of an East County nursing student was changed forever as he stood outside his disabled car on Interstate 8 early Friday morning. Jimmy Johnson, 26, is just beginning a long road to recovery after a drive home turned into a nightmare. Just before 1 a.m., Johnson, his girlfriend, and roommate were driving to their home. His car broke down. They couldn't get to the shoulder. It says Johnson's 202 Cadillac Eldorado broke down right near Tavern 4, forcing Johnson and his roommate to push it to the shoulder. According to Johnson, he had just finished a call for help and was standing on the shoulder with the other two when he saw a semi-truck coming right at him. So, due to the severity of his injuries, he was obviously struck by this truck. He has a fractured spine, pelvis, and right ankle. His left leg had to be amputated below the knee, and now they're going to have to, I guess, amputate above the knee. But here's what I like. It says, despite the injuries, Rackley says the Santana High grad and first-year nursing student has remained positive, focusing on his recovery. His friend says, "I'm honestly amazed at how he's handling it. I couldn't have handled it this way." As for Johnson's dream of becoming a nurse, Rackley said, "There's no chance this will put an end to them." I want to say, I wish you all the best, Mr. Johnson. I hope you get better, and I look forward to having you in the profession of nursing. I just shared that because that, to me, touched my heart to know that, so again, another potential nursing student, a potential great nurse, suffering tragedy and continue to plan to become a nurse. I think that's wonderful. So I wanted to encourage them. This is another story that I found. And I want to get your opinion and tell me what you think about this. This story is talking about from WTVC, fast track nursing students at UTC to soon get degrees in shorter time to fight shortage. I don't know if this is a happy or something that scares me to death. Okay, so it says that they're looking to address the state's current nursing shortage by allowing the students to take 3 semesters instead of 5 to become a nurse. And so the class will be an accelerated BSN program, and we certainly had accelerated degrees. This is for students who already have a bachelor's degree in any field, They'll be able to gain a nursing degree in 3 semesters throughout 1 year rather than the typical 5 semester program. That's a lot of learning, 3 semesters. So it says a study published by the Tennessee Hospital Association showed that Tennessee had a shortage of more than 15,000 nurses in 2021. UTC's goal is to bring more qualified nurses into the workplace. The director of the School of Nursing says that the students will be prepared, stating, you have to understand we're talking about a different type of student. We're talking about a student who has already earned a college degree and understand what it takes to get a degree in a particular area. So we'll see what happens. What do you think about that? I mean, I know we need more nurses in the pipeline, but I don't know. 3 semesters as a baccalaureate prepared nurse myself. So I'm assuming this is an associate's program because I can't imagine this being a bachelor's program. So it must be an associate's in nursing. Um, yeah, that seems pretty fast. And I already pretty much had a bachelor's degree when I came in. So I want to bring that up. I came in as a sophomore to get another bachelor's as a RN because I already had a bachelor's in biology, or almost. I just have to transfer back 2 classes. So that's what makes me think I said this must be an associate program because I can't imagine it being a baccalaureate program. All right, let's move on. We got a couple more stories. Yeah, I wanted to talk about this story that came. This is, I believe, from the I want to say this is from the Washington Post. And I guess I'm just going to quickly highlight this because it says, why are nurses quitting? Ask the nurse no hospital will hire. In January 2022, 150 healthcare workers piled into a Manhattan comedy club. Many hadn't been inside an entertainment venue in nearly 2 years, and even now their heads flash with images of dystopian nightmare, the body bags and cold storage trucks, the last ever FaceTime calls, the unvaccinated patients who spewed invective before being hooked up to respirators. More recently, they've come off long, understaffed shifts in ERs and ICUs across the city. They were exhausted, but they were in the right place. They had come to see Katie Duke, a 40-year-old, 5 foot tall troublemaker in black and mocha suede Jordans who emerged from the pandemic as a nursing celebrity. Duke is a nurse practitioner, content creator, and healthcare advocate who hosts a society and cultural podcast titled Bad Decisions. She's also an Instagram influencer who promotes lifestyle brands to her 43,000 followers. But her 90-minute show, Bad Decisions, a night of healthcare comedy and catharsis, was her first experience with stand up. If it went well, a booking agency had promised her a national tour. Okay, so it says this is interesting because a lot of nurses have been taking to social media now. You've probably heard of nurses like Nurse Blake. Shout out to Nurse Blake. Love your stuff, man. And so we're seeing that. So it says Duke has been pushing back on expectations about what a nurse is and how she, it's almost always a she, should act for nearly a decade. Among them, she told me later that week, nurses should work in hospitals. Nurses are merely support staff for doctors. This is what I heard. Nursing isn't creative or entrepreneurial. Nurses are tireless and have endless reserves of patience. Nurses keep their discontent to themselves. And I'm going to call BS on that one, right? Because we've seen it. We covered that on this show. So since the start of the pandemic, nurses have taken to social media in large numbers to share their experiences and to vent. And we've talked about those nurses that made those TikToks and they ended up losing their jobs because of it. We've talked about nurses that shared, breaking down in their cars and things like that. And so this is what some of the things that are said. So it says nurses don't dispute that patients deserve compassion and respect, right? But many feel that their roles are misunderstood and their expertise undervalued. People don't respect nurses like they do doctors. As a result, nurses are leaving hospitals in droves and they're establishing new careers, not just in healthcare, but as creatives and entrepreneurs. Ding, 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 ding. right? Successful influencers like Duke are leading the way, providing empathy, mentorship, and a license to speak out. But it's a tricky balance. Duke wants and needs to work as a nurse to stay relevant, but her hospital employers don't love the movement she's aiding that's encouraging nurses to criticize working conditions and culture or to leave bedside work entirely. Hospitals were chronically understaffed before the coronavirus pandemic, and the shortfalls have only worsened. But why should nurses be held to a different standard than other workers pivoting during the Great Resignation? Duke argues that nurses are especially fed up and burnt out. That's what I've been saying all along. And yet, as caretakers, nobody expects them to put their physical and emotional well being first. But that's starting to change. One lone voice, Duke is now a representative of one. And we know that as nurses, we make up the largest body of healthcare workers because there's about 3 times as many RNs as there are physicians. They also have died of COVID at higher rates than any other healthcare workers because guess what? We're the ones who are in the room a lot longer than physicians and other healthcare team workers. So nursing staff. And so Wendy Miller, Associate Dean at the University School of Nursing in Bloomington, says that high stress and anxiety are the antecedents to burnout. But you've hit the nadir when you become emotionally detached from your work. It's almost like a loss of meaning. And remember that story that we talked about earlier, that loss of meaning. It says before the pandemic, between a third and a half of nurses and physicians already reported symptoms of burnout. A COVID impact study published in March of 2022 by the American Nurses Association found that this number has risen to 60% among acute care nurses. This should not be surprising. We've talked about this. But it's interesting in that as we look at it, as she talks about in her story in her podcast, she talked about at 20, she was working a minimum wage at a deli and living with an abusive boyfriend in her hometown of St. Louis. Her parents were covering her school tuition, but they were otherwise estranged. And so she was working to become a nursing student. She did all the stuff, got there, did a lot of stuff. She did a lot in her life. I'm not going to read her story. You can read the article. But what is interesting is that she's talking. I want to focus on her stand-up comedy show. They went very well. They booked a 15-city tour. She's taking short-term contract gigs as a travel nurse and nurse practitioner, earning money by promoting various brands on her channel. But she says those partnerships didn't cover her bills and credit card debt and nursing school loans in the long term. She said maybe she had 1 million YouTube followers, maybe. But the short-term gigs, she appreciates them. They give her flexibility and help her avoid the burnout trap that often accompanies full-time bedside work. And, this is interesting because as we talk about this more on social media and more healthcare professionals are turning to social media. I mean, look at Z-Dog MD. Love you show, man. Talking about some of these things. And I think we need to talk more about this. So I encourage you to read this article. I plan to dive into it a lot better. Hey, Ms. Duke, if you ever hear this and you want to come on my show, come on my podcast. We'd love to talk to you. But yeah, so I think this would be great. And so let's think about what we can do as nurses and how we can make a bigger impact. So I'm glad that she's got a chance to make that impact and to talk about these things from a nursing perspective. Because we often, and I appreciate Z-Dog. Don't get me wrong. He's a big advocate for nurses. I get it. Love you. But there's something to be said about having a nurse talk about her own experience, her lived experience. And as much as we love the docs, most of you have not walked in our shoes. And so it's hard to understand what nurses go through. Let's go ahead and get ready to end our segment today with our nurse making a difference, because I just thought this was great and wonderful. And we're getting close to our time. It's almost the hour. And so this is coming from news station Portsmouth, Virginia, WTKR. It says Portsmouth nurse, Norfolk firefighter, jump into action, save life during flight. huddled outside a conference room in a hallway with Norfolk firefighter Captain Jared Sergi at Bon. Let me make this bigger. There we go. At Bon Secours Maryville Medical Center. His wife works there as a nursing supervisor. She doesn't know Jared is there with their two sons, Maximilian and Leonidas. They're about to surprise her. Asked Jared how they kept the secret. He said he doesn't know with a smile. The surprise revolves around the family's recent Florida vacation, or at least their flight to the Sunshine State. There are actually two surprises. So while they're on this flight, um, they were on the flight and they realized something was happening. There was a woman there, and she became unconscious, I believe. Yeah, she slumped over, and ultimately they put her on the floor. We had a little more room to work. Um, she works in emergency medicine. Her husband, he's out in the field, so they were able to get her hooked up to IVs and keep her going, get medication. He got vital signs and kind of worked on her until they were able to land the plane and give her out. So she was presented with, and her husband, with an Everyday Hero Award along with a Visa gift card from Southern Bank, and she got a nursing award. So that's our nurse making a difference, and this is what I'm talking about. Nurses are out there, and we are making a difference in what we do in our everyday life, and we never know when we'll be called upon to do something. But even the nurse that is there at the bedside giving that medication, you are impacting a life and making a difference every day you show up to your job, and I want to applaud you. So anytime there's a nurse making a difference and getting exposure, I like to put that out there. So if you know of nurses making a difference, let me know. All right, that ends our news segment. Let's get into the announcements and get on out of here, because I know you're all ready to do some other things. So we have coming up our upcoming events. We have a TB validation. That's passed. Our Give Peace Mind workshop is today. And our Legal Nurse Consulting Basics is coming up this weekend, February the 25th. You can get your ticket on the Eventbrite. And don't forget to tune into our Nurse Shark Academy show, where we interview nurse entrepreneurs and business leaders. I'm very excited about our upcoming segments. So please tune in. You can find us on Podbean, Spotify, Amazon. You can check out our Nurse Shark Academy website. You can find us there, or find us on our YouTube channel. And I thank you for tuning in. Thanks for being here for today.